When my mother said they were moving into my sister's mansion, I thought it was a joke. It was a humid Friday afternoon, and the air smelled like summer rain when her message came through. I was sitting at my drafting table, reviewing the final sketches for a client's lakeside cabin, when my phone vibrated 3 times in a row. My family group chat, the one they rarely used unless someone had a birthday or a crisis. "Look, Lydia's house is finally ready," my mother wrote. Then, photo after photo filled the screen: a sprawling 2-story lakefront mansion with white cedar siding, a private dock, a glittering blue kayak anchored in the water. My father was standing on the deck, grinning with a bottle of champagne in his hand. My mother stood beside him, her arm around Lydia, who was wearing a white sundress, her blonde hair curling in the lake breeze. Beneath the photo, my mom had added a caption: "We're finally home." Not Lydia's home, not their visit, just home. At first I stared at it in silence. My eyes kept circling back to the phrase, as if some rational explanation would appear if I read it enough times. Then another message appeared, this time from my father. "We'll be living with Lydia for a while. It's better this way. She has space, and we can help her settle in. You understand, right?" I blinked. My pen rolled off the table and hit the floor. They hadn't told me. Not once. Not even hinted that they planned to move out of their old house, the one where I had grown up, where I still helped pay the property taxes, when Dad's pension fell short. The next photo showed the 3 of them raising glasses on the patio. Lydia had written, "Finally giving Mom and Dad the retirement they deserve." The post already had dozens of comments from friends and extended family. "Such a lovely gesture, Lydia. What a blessing to your parents. They're lucky to have you." My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. I sat there, staring at the glow of my phone, the room suddenly too quiet. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, pushing around the heavy air that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. For a long time, I didn't move. My throat tightened as something uncomfortably familiar spread through me, that invisible ache I'd carried since childhood. I opened my messages to Mom directly and typed, "You're moving in with Lydia?" Then deleted it. Typed again, deleted it. Instead, I wrote, "When did you decide this?" A minute later, the bubbles appeared, typing, pausing, typing again. Then her reply blinked into view. "Sweetheart, it just made sense. Lydia has the space, and you're busy with work. You've got your own life. She needs us more right now." My chest tightened, the words blurred. I wasn't angry at first, just hollow. I scrolled back up to the photos. Lydia's house, $515,000 according to the listing she'd bragged about last spring, gleamed in the golden light of the lake. It was the kind of place I used to sketch as a dream project. Tall windows, open beams, light spilling across honey-colored floors. Now it was their forever home. I remembered when Lydia bought it. She'd sent me the listing out of the blue. "Thinking of putting a down payment on this beauty. Isn't it perfect?" I'd congratulated her, of course. That was before I knew she'd been asking our parents for help with the closing costs. Before I learned they'd emptied half of their retirement savings to make it happen. Back then, Mom had said, "It's an investment for all of us. Maybe someday we'll all stay there together." But now, apparently, someday meant without me. The next message came 10 minutes later. "We'll visit you soon, Clara, once we're settled in. You understand, right?" That phrase again, "you understand." As if I'd always been the one expected to understand. I placed the phone face down on the table and stared at the grain of the wood beneath my hands. I could almost hear their laughter across the lake, see my father's favorite chair positioned by Lydia's fireplace, smell my mother's roast cooking in her kitchen, all of it taking place in a home that wasn't mine, in a life I hadn't been invited into. Outside, the sky darkened. Rain began to fall, slow and steady, tracing lines down the window pane. My reflection looked pale, ghost-like, split between the glass and the dim light of the room. I told myself not to cry. I was too old for that. I was 38, successful, self-sufficient, the owner of an architecture firm I'd built from scratch. But the tears came anyway, small and silent, sliding down my cheeks before I could stop them. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the pattern, the same one that had followed me my whole life, the quiet, unspoken hierarchy in our family. Lydia, the golden child, me, the afterthought. And now, even as an adult, it seemed nothing had changed. I scrolled one last time through the photos. Lydia holding a glass of wine on the dock, Mom arranging sunflowers on the counter, Dad smiling at the lake like it belonged to him. My phone buzzed again, this time, a voice note from Mom. Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "Don't take it personally, honey. Lydia just needs us right now. You're doing great, you don't need anyone. I closed my eyes. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming softly on the window, drowning out the faint hum of the city. I imagined the lake wide, still, and gleaming under a fading sun and them, together, in that bright house. While I sat alone in my one-bedroom apartment with my half-eaten dinner and blueprints scattered across the table. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the messages keep coming, pictures of unpacked boxes, Dad's fishing rods, Mom's new curtains, Lydia's golden retriever chasing sticks in the water. Every photo was another confirmation. They were building a life that no longer included me. At 2 a.m., I walked out to my balcony and let the rain soak my hair. The air was cool, smelling faintly of pine and asphalt. Lights shimmered across the wet street below. I thought about calling them, saying something, anything, but what would it matter? They'd already chosen where they belonged. Somewhere between the raindrops and the city's hum, a numbness set in, the kind that doesn't come from shock, but from recognition, the realization that this wasn't sudden at all. It was simply the latest chapter in a story that had been unfolding for years. And as thunder rolled distantly across the sky, I whispered into the night, not to anyone in particular but to myself. They finally moved into her mansion, and I finally know where I stand. The lake shimmered in my mind, a place of light and laughter I could almost see but would never touch. Some stories, I realized, don't begin with loss. They begin with understanding. And mine was just beginning. I used to think love was something you earned, that if you tried hard enough, helped enough, behaved enough, someone would finally look at you and see you. I learned early that in my family, love was a limited resource, and Lydia was the one who got the first share. When we were little, our house sat on the edge of a quiet suburb outside Duluth. The winters were long and the floors were always cold under my bare feet. Mom would hum old country songs while making oatmeal, the smell of cinnamon and burnt toast filling the kitchen. Lydia would sit on the counter in her pink pajamas, swinging her legs, spoon in hand, while I set the table because Clara's the big girl, she knows how. That phrase followed me through childhood like a shadow. The big girl, the responsible one, the helper, the one who didn't need attention because she understood. I remember my 6th birthday. The cake was shaped like a butterfly, half chocolate and half vanilla. Lydia, who was only 2 then, wanted the pink half. Mom cut her a slice before I even made a wish. "You'll let your sister have the pretty side, won't you, Clara?" she'd said, smiling in that soft, expectant way that made saying no impossible. I watched the pink frosting smear across Lydia's cheeks as my candle sputtered out, unblown. Mom laughed, Dad took pictures, and I learned that being good often meant being invisible. As we got older, the differences deepened. Lydia was delicate, she bruised easily, cried at commercials, fainted once during a thunderstorm. I was the steady one, the fixer. When she fell off her bike, I cleaned her scraped knees while Mom rushed to find her favorite stuffed bear. When she forgot her lunch, I gave her mine. When she failed her first algebra test, Dad sighed and said, "Not everyone's a numbers person, like Clara." But the sigh carried disappointment, not for Lydia, but for me, for expecting more from her. Our childhood photos tell the story better than I ever could. Lydia in bright dresses, always in the center, her curls catching the light. Me beside her, one hand on her shoulder, half smiling, my dress a hand-me-down from the year before. Even holidays had a pattern. Lydia got the window seat at Thanksgiving, I got the folding chair at the end. When relatives came over, they'd pinch her cheeks and say how sweet and gentle she was, then turn to me with, "And you must be so proud of your little sister." I learned to swallow jealousy like medicine, bitter but necessary. The first time I truly understood favoritism wasn't a phase, was the Christmas I was 14. Lydia was 10, still believing in Santa. We each had a wish list on the fridge. Mine had one item, a used camera from the pawn shop on Main Street. Lydia's list was full: a dollhouse, roller skates, a pink coat she'd seen in the mall window. On Christmas morning, she got everything she'd asked for. My box was small, wrapped neatly, a red bow on top. Inside was a journal and a note in Mom's handwriting. "You can write about all the wonderful things you'll build someday." They meant well, I think. They always said I was mature for my age. But being mature felt a lot like being forgotten. I started spending more time outside in the backyard, sketching the trees, the roof lines of the neighbors' houses, anything that felt still enough to notice me back. That's where I found my love for design, though I didn't know it yet. It was the only place I could make something that stayed exactly how I wanted. Lydia, meanwhile, grew into a sunbeam everyone wanted to stand near. She had a way of making people feel chosen, even when she didn't mean to. Teachers adored her. Boys lined up to carry her books. Mom said she had a lightness about her, a word no one had ever used for me. When she turned 16, she got a silver bracelet from our parents engraved with our bright star. I didn't get one when I turned 16. I didn't expect to. By then, I had learned that expectations were dangerous things. The years blurred after that. Lydia's teenage years were a montage of recitals, parties, prom photos, and laughter echoing down hallways. Mine were quiet late nights studying, working part-time at a diner to save for college, patching the cracks in my independence before anyone noticed. I remember the day she got into the University of Minnesota. Mom cried. Dad opened champagne. Lydia screamed and danced barefoot in the kitchen. I clapped and smiled, my own acceptance letter to the same university sitting unopened in my backpack. I hadn't told anyone yet. I wanted to wait until dinner, to make it special. But when Lydia's celebration stretched into the night, my news felt small, like an echo that wouldn't carry. So I folded the letter back into the envelope and hid it under my pillow. That night, I stared at the ceiling and promised myself that one day, I'd have something worth celebrating, something that wouldn't be compared, diminished, or overlooked. After high school, life split us apart in the way only families can, physically distant but emotionally tethered. Lydia called home often. I didn't. I worked 2 jobs through college, sending money when Dad's car broke down or Mom's prescriptions weren't covered. They always thanked me politely but saved their excitement for Lydia's stories, her new apartment, her job, her boyfriend. Whenever I visited, my old bedroom had been turned into a storage space. Lydia's room, though, stayed intact, her posters still on the wall, her vanity polished, her perfume bottles arranged as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. One evening, during a family dinner years later, Mom said, "We're lucky to have 2 wonderful daughters, one who builds things, and one who keeps us close." Everyone laughed. I did too, though something in me cracked quietly, because I knew which one they preferred to be close to. That moment, like so many others, became part of the invisible weight I carried into adulthood. The weight that settled in my chest the day they moved into Lydia's mansion, the day I realized that pattern hadn't faded with time. The truth is, I had been replaced long before that house ever existed. The mansion was just the physical proof walls and windows built on years of quiet imbalance. When I think back now, I can still smell the cinnamon oatmeal, still see Lydia's pink pajamas, still hear Mom's voice saying, "Clara understands." And maybe I did. Maybe I understood too soon that being the strong one means no one ever checks if you're tired. Maybe that's why, when they chose Lydia's lakefront mansion over my quiet apartment, it didn't surprise me. It just confirmed what I'd always known. In our family, love had never been evenly built. And I was done pretending it was. When everything quiets, when the traffic outside fades, when the city exhales, that's when the memories crawl out of their hiding places. That's when you feel the ache of being unchosen, heavy as wet wool. The night after I learned my parents moved in with Lydia, I sat in the living room with no lights on. The glow from the street lamp outside slanted through the blinds, striping the floor in pale amber. The clock ticked like a metronome, 1 second at a time, as if counting the distance between who I was and who they wanted me to be. I tried to work, tried to bury myself in blueprints and measurements, the language that never lied. But the lines blurred, the ink smeared, and before long I was just staring at the blank wall, the silence pressing against my ribs. The messages kept coming that evening, new photos from the lakefront mansion. My father standing proudly by the dock, fishing rod in hand. Lydia beaming beside Mom in a new kitchen with granite counters and skylights. Mom had captioned it, "Our dream finally realized." Our, that word again, a 3-letter wound. At some point, I muted the group chat. But even after the phone went still, I could still hear them laughter echoing faintly in my head, the hum of conversation, the soft clink of wine glasses, the sound of family, without me. Around midnight, I made myself coffee just to have something to do. The pot sputtered, the smell bitter and comforting. I poured it into a chipped mug, one I'd bought during college, and sat by the window, watching rain ripple down the glass. From my apartment, the city lights looked like smudged stars. Somewhere out there, my parents were unpacking boxes, settling into a home I'd never stepped foot in. I thought about calling Mom, not to fight, just to ask why, but I could already hear her voice, soft and tired. "Don't make this about you, Clara. You're stronger than this." So I didn't call. I just sat there until the coffee went cold and my reflection in the window looked like a stranger's. I don't know when I started crying. It wasn't dramatic, no sobs, no gasps, just quiet tears sliding down, one after another. I hadn't cried in years. Not when I worked double shifts through college. Not when I broke up with the man I thought I'd marry. Not even when my father forgot my birthday 2 years in a row. But that night, something in me cracked open. The tears came from somewhere deep, from every time I'd been told, "You'll understand," from every dinner table where my chair sat slightly apart, from every quiet victory no one had noticed. I leaned my forehead against the glass. It was cool, almost soothing. The city's hum felt distant, like it belonged to a life I'd already stepped out of. For the first time, I let myself say it out loud, just a whisper to the empty room. They don't love me the same. It wasn't anger. It wasn't self-pity. It was truth. And the truth, spoken aloud, hurt worse than the silence ever did. I thought about driving to the lake, showing up at that mansion, standing at the doorstep until someone opened the door. But what would I say? Why didn't you choose me? The words felt childish, even if they were honest. Instead, I sat there until dawn crept in a thin line of pink along the horizon. My eyes burned. My hands trembled from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. By morning, I was back at work, hiding behind routine. Meetings, client calls, site visits. I smiled where I had to, nodded when needed. But behind every polite expression was a quiet exhaustion that no one saw. That week blurred. Days melted together like watercolor in rain. I'd come home to a half-empty apartment, takeout containers on the counter, unanswered messages from friends who didn't understand why I'd gone so quiet. One night, I opened my email and saw Lydia's name. Subject line, "Family dinner soon?" The message was simple. "Hey, Mom and Dad are hosting a dinner here next weekend. You should come. Bring dessert. It'll be nice to have you over for once." For once. 2 words that said everything. I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Thanks, I'm busy with a project." Then deleted that. Typed again, "Sure, what time?" Deleted that too. In the end, I didn't reply at all. That Saturday I worked late, though there wasn't much to do. When I got home, the apartment was dark except for the blinking light on my answering machine. My father's voice filled the room, warm and casual. "Hey kiddo, dinner was great. You missed out. Lydia made that lemon pie you used to love. Next time, okay?" Then laughter in the background, "Mom, maybe Lydia," and the soft click of the line going dead. I sat down on the couch and replayed it once, twice, until it sounded like static. Then I turned it off. There's a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, it comes from being surrounded by people who think you're fine. That was me, the dependable one. The daughter who didn't need saving, who didn't ask for anything, who never made a scene. And because of that, they'd forgotten I was still capable of breaking. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about something my father had said when I was 12. Lydia had broken Mom's favorite vase, and I'd taken the blame to protect her. Later, Dad had patted my shoulder and said, "That's what strong people do, Clara. They take care of others." He'd meant it as praise. But I realize now, that's when it started, when I learned that love, for me, came with a condition. Be strong enough to be ignored. By the time the clock hit 2, I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by old sketches and coffee stains, my head in my hands. My chest hurt not sharply, but deeply, the kind of ache that feels like weight pressing down from the inside. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to send a message that said, "I'm tired of understanding." But instead, I did what I always did, nothing. Because silence was safer. Somewhere outside, a car drove by, headlights sweeping across the room like a brief sunrise before fading again. I watched the shadows shift and thought about how easy it had been for them to move on, how they'd filled that lake house with furniture and laughter, how seamlessly I'd been edited out of their family portrait. That's when it hit me, the thought I'd been avoiding all along. Maybe it wasn't that they didn't see me. Maybe they'd just decided they didn't have to. I curled up on the couch, knees to my chest, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping faintly on the balcony railing. And in the dim light of my apartment, with my phone silent beside me and the world asleep beyond the window, I whispered the words I hadn't dared to before. "I'm done trying to be their good daughter." The words lingered in the air, fragile, trembling, but real. For the first time, I didn't cry after saying them. I just sat there, breathing, letting the silence settle like dust around me. And somewhere inside that quiet, a small, flickering spark appeared. Not hope, not yet, but something close. The morning after my breakdown, sunlight poured through the blinds like a quiet mercy. It didn't change anything. My parents were still at Lydia's mansion. The messages still sat unanswered, but the light made the apartment feel less like a cage and more like a beginning. Dust drifted through the air, glittering in that pale gold way that happens only in early morning. I wrapped my hands around a cup of lukewarm coffee and watched the city wake up below. I felt emptied out, but in that emptiness, there was space, the first space I'd had in years. For the first time in a long while, I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll through their photos or replay my father's voicemail. Instead, I opened my sketchbook, flipped to a clean page, and started to draw. No project in mind, no client waiting. Just lines rough, uneven, almost angry at first. Walls, windows, shadows, light. I sketched until the page filled, until my fingertips turned gray with graphite. When I looked down, what I'd drawn wasn't a house. It was something in between half home, half fortress. A structure made not to impress anyone, but to stand alone. That was the first time I realized I didn't need to belong somewhere to build something beautiful. I could build it myself. A week later, life returned to its usual rhythm, or at least, what passed for rhythm. My firm, Evenscape Designs, was still small but stable. I had 3 employees, hardworking, talented, young enough to remind me of the version of myself who once believed talent alone could earn love. Then one afternoon, while sorting through contracts, I got a call from an old colleague, a real estate developer named Martin Devereaux. His voice was hurried, distracted, the kind of tone people use when they're desperate but pretending not to be. "Clara, I've got a problem," he said. "We were about to break ground on a luxury eco-villa project by the lake, and the design firm just backed out. I need a replacement fast. You're the first person I thought of." The lake. My heart skipped. "Which one?" "Marble Lake," he said. "Near Stillwater. You'd be perfect for it. It's a big one, 10 villas, private docks, sustainability focus. We need concept drafts in 2 weeks." Stillwater, the same region as Lydia's mansion. I stared at the blueprint in front of me, the fortress I'd drawn days ago, and felt something inside me click. "I'll take it," I said. For the next several days, I worked like someone possessed. The kind of work where time loses meaning. I filled my walls with sketches, pinned up material samples, cedar, glass, slate textures, that breathed both strength and serenity. I wanted these homes to feel alive, as if they'd grown from the landscape itself. Sleep became optional, meals, forgettable. The world shrank to graphite, paper, and the hum of jazz low in the background. Each night, I'd look out my window at the city lights and imagine the lake wide, reflective, waiting. But on the 5th night, as I finalized the concept renderings, I found something in the project folder that froze me mid-breath. The original proposal file still contained the name of the firm that had dropped out, Lydia Evans Interiors, my sister's company. She wasn't an architect, she did staging, event decor, small-scale interiors. I hadn't even realized she'd expanded into design bids. I opened the attached notes. Her handwriting was there in the margins of the digital mock-ups, neat and looping. "Add rose gold accents. Make it feel elegant but warm, something Mom would love." Something Mom would love. It felt like a knife, sharp and quiet. She'd been offered this project first. She'd had it in her hands. And she'd never mentioned it to me, even though she knew this was exactly the kind of commission my firm had been trying to land for years. She'd turned it down, and somehow, fate had placed it in my lap. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at her handwriting. The old ache came back, the one I thought I'd already cried out of my body. But this time it didn't crush me. It lit something instead. Betrayal, when faced head-on, can become fuel. I opened a new file and renamed the project. Project Solace. I wasn't going to build homes that reminded anyone of my mother. I was going to build homes that made people feel whole on their own. Days turned into weeks. The office became my sanctuary, concrete floors, steel beams, the faint smell of sawdust and coffee. The team grew invested too. My assistant Maya once said, "You're different lately, sharper, calmer, like you're finally building for yourself." She didn't know how right she was. The work consumed me in the best way. I stopped checking social media, stopped comparing myself to the life my family was pretending to live. My world became blueprints, renderings, and sunrise meetings by the water's edge. Every time I stood on the construction site, the lake mist curling around my boots, I felt closer to peace than I ever had in their house, or their voices, or their approval. The project launched 6 months later. At the grand reveal, journalists called it a masterpiece of emotional architecture. The villas shimmered against the water like reflections of resilience, all glass, wood, and quiet dignity. Clients lined up to buy them before the paint even dried. Investors called. The firm's name, my name, spread beyond state lines. But the moment that stayed with me came at sunset, when I stood on the dock after everyone had gone home. The water glowed copper beneath the fading light. A breeze carried the smell of pine and wet stone. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about my family. I wasn't thinking about being forgotten or left out. I was thinking about foundations, how they hold, how they settle, how they endure even when the world above them shifts. My foundation was finally my own. I drove home that night in silence, the road unfolding like ribbon beneath my headlights. I passed the exit that led toward Lydia's mansion, the place where my parents now lived, but I didn't turn. For the first time, I didn't feel drawn to that house. I didn't feel small or bitter or unseen. Instead, I whispered to the empty car, "They can live there. I'll build everywhere else." And I meant it. 2 weeks later, Architectural Digest Midwest featured my work on their cover. Clara Evans, the woman who built Serenity. I sent the magazine to my parents not out of spite, but closure. I didn't include a note, just the issue, folded neatly in a padded envelope. I don't know if they ever read it, but one evening my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Your designs are beautiful, Clara. We're proud of you." No emojis, no heart, just that. It was small, but somehow, I didn't need more. Because by then, I'd already realized the truth. Success isn't revenge, it's reclamation. And I was reclaiming myself blueprint by blueprint, beam by beam. That night, I stood by my window again. The city glowed like a constellation, and for once, I didn't feel alone inside it. Instead of anger, there was calm. Instead of hurt, direction. They had built their dream in someone else's house. I had built mine from the ruins they left behind. And the foundation, this time, was unshakable. 2 years later, my life no longer resembled the fragments I once picked up from the floor of my old apartment. The morning light now poured through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline, a world of glass and quiet motion, where each sunrise painted the walls gold. My home wasn't a mansion by the lake, but it was mine, an open-concept loft built from the same calm, clean lines I'd once sketched in that grief-fueled night. Pale oak floors, linen drapes, soft light that breathed rather than shone. Every object had a story. Every corner felt like intention made solid. On the coffee table sat a single glass vase holding white peonies, my mother's favorite flowers, though I'd never grown them for her. These were for me. Sometimes I'd stand at the balcony in the early morning with a cup of espresso, feeling the wind against my face, watching the city wake below. It was the kind of view I used to imagine when my family treated my dreams like hobbies. Now, it was my reality. After the Solace Villas launched, everything changed. Investors began calling nonstop. I turned down more projects than I accepted, not because of arrogance, but because I finally understood the value of my time. When the Halcyon Group, a luxury development firm in Chicago, offered me creative control over a new eco-hospitality line, I hesitated only for a moment before signing. They wanted me to design not homes, but sanctuaries. A series of high-end retreats across the Midwest, places where people could unplug, heal, and reconnect. I called the collection the Stillness Series. Each property reflected something I'd once lacked: belonging, safety, quiet strength. By the third retreat's completion, Evenscape Designs had grown from a small firm into one of the most sought-after design houses in the region. Journalists described my work as architecture that listens. I liked the idea that walls could listen, that light itself could feel empathy. At the ribbon cutting for our largest project, the Aspen Vale Resort cameras flashed like a storm of tiny suns. Investors smiled for the press, and guests sipped champagne in crystal flutes. And there I was, standing in the middle of it all, calm, composed, the soft hum of the crowd echoing in my chest like distant thunder. My assistant Maya approached with a quiet grin. "You did it, Clara." I smiled back. "No, we did it." The truth was, the triumph didn't come from money or headlines. It came from the moment I walked through those finished spaces and felt them breathe. Spaces that didn't need approval to exist beautifully. Still, the success came with its own kind of solitude, not the aching loneliness of before, but a gentle, private quiet. I traveled often, slept little, and learned to find comfort in airports and early check-ins. But there was one trip that stayed with me more than any other. A magazine in New York invited me to speak at their annual gala, Women in Design. It was held at the Harrington Ballroom, all chandeliers and champagne light. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage wearing a sleek black gown, minimalist jewelry, no pretense, just grace and stillness. Architecture, I told the audience, isn't about building walls, it's about building understanding. My story began with exclusion, with being told I didn't belong. But every design I create now carries the opposite message. You have a place here. Applause followed, warm and human. Afterward, strangers came up to me, young women, mothers, students, telling me that my story had given them hope, that my calm was contagious. I smiled, posed for photos, shook hands. But later, When I slipped into the back of my car and the driver closed the door, I exhaled a long, quiet breath. The world outside glimmered, city lights streaming like veins of gold across the night. I leaned my head back and thought about the road it had taken to get here. The nights crying on my kitchen floor. The silence after my parents' betrayal. The way success hadn't erased the hurt but had rewritten its meaning. I didn't escape my pain. I rebuilt it into architecture. Wealth followed naturally, like a tide, but I never flaunted it. My car was simple, a dark gray Tesla. My clothes, understated. I learned that elegance wasn't noise. It was silence that demanded attention. I did, however, indulge in one thing. My studio by the water. A private workspace built on the edge of Marble Lake, the very lake where Lydia's mansion stood. I bought the land quietly, through an investment partner, and designed a glass-walled studio that seemed to float above the water. No one knew it was mine. Every weekend, I'd drive there before sunrise. The air would smell of wet cedar and lake mist. I'd brew coffee, open the tall windows, and let the silence roll in. Across the lake, through the trees, I could see the faint outline of Lydia's property, the roofline glinting in the sunday. It didn't hurt anymore. In fact, it felt poetic. She had her mansion, filled with curated elegance, and our parents' laughter echoing down marble halls. I had an open space where I could breathe, create, and be alone without being lonely. And that difference, that freedom, was worth more than any inheritance. By the end of the second year, Evenscape was operating in 3 cities. Maya had become my business partner. We were featured in Forbes Women, and investors began calling from abroad. But the most meaningful project came not from money, but from compassion. A nonprofit reached out, an organization that built transitional homes for women leaving abusive families. They wanted my help designing safe, beautiful spaces that didn't look like shelters. I said yes immediately. As I walked through the half-finished frames of the first house, a faint smell of fresh timber filling the air, I felt something stir, a deep, quiet peace. These women had stories like mine: betrayal, loss, the hunger to feel seen. And I thought maybe this was what all the pain had been preparing me for, to turn what once broke me into something that could shelter others. That evening, I returned to my lake studio. The sky was the color of honey and fading embers. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the dock, barefoot, the cool wood beneath my feet. In the distance, Lydia's mansion glowed like a mirage. But for the first time, I realized she hadn't built a home. She'd built a stage. Mine, though smaller, was real. Every beam, every breath of air, honest. I took a sip of wine, closed my eyes, and smiled. Because somewhere between their laughter and my silence, I had built something stronger than approval, a life that needed no audience. That night, as I locked up the studio, the moon reflected in the lake like a perfect silver coin. I stood there for a moment, feeling the quiet pulse of everything I had become. The girl who once begged to be seen had built a world so radiant it couldn't be ignored. And in that silence, the gentle hum of water against the shore, I whispered, almost to the wind itself. They called me cruel, but maybe cruelty was just courage they couldn't understand. The letter arrived in late autumn. No return address, no flourish, just my name written in my mother's familiar cursive, the kind she used on birthday cards when I was a child. I found it tucked between business envelopes on my desk, its cream paper oddly out of place among the crisp, printed contracts and architectural drawings. For a long while, I just stared at it. I could have ignored it. I could have tossed it in the bin and called it closure. But curiosity, that old, unwanted ghost, tugged at me until I finally slit the seal open. Inside was a short note. "Clara, we need to talk. It's about Lydia. Please, come home." Mom. No explanations, no apologies, just a plea, simple and shaking at the edges. The word home caught in my throat like ash. Still, 2 days later, I found myself driving toward Marble Lake. The road was lined with bare trees, their branches clawing at the gray sky. My car's reflection ghosted along the frozen water as I approached the familiar turn, the private drive that led to Lydia's mansion. Their mansion. I hadn't been there since the night they called me cruel. The house looked smaller than I remembered, though it was still enormous. The lake's winter fog pressed against the glass walls, blurring its once pristine beauty. When I parked, I noticed the paint near the porch rails had started to peel. A corner of the roof sagged, slightly subtle, but noticeable to someone who understood structure. It felt poetic, how even perfection decays without care. The front door opened before I knocked. My mother stood there, older than I remembered. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly, but her eyes, those calm, assessing eyes, looked hollow. "Clara," she said, her voice breaking between surprise and relief. I nodded, wordless. She led me through the familiar marble foyer, where my footsteps echoed like unwelcome ghosts. The house felt colder, quieter, the air heavy with something unspoken. When I stepped into the living room, I froze. Lydia was there. She sat curled on the edge of the sofa, wrapped in a blanket that didn't match the decor. Her once glossy hair hung limp around her shoulders. The confident spark that had always followed her like a halo was gone. "Hey," she whispered. I hadn't heard her voice in over 3 years. I said nothing. My mother gestured for me to sit. "Your sister's been through a lot. We all have." The silence between us stretched like wire. Finally, my father appeared from the hallway, slower, frailer, his once imposing posture diminished. I realized then what this was. Not a reunion, a reckoning. They told me everything in fragments. Lydia's husband, Paul, had left her. Apparently, his business trips were affairs in disguise, and when she finally confronted him, he emptied the joint account and disappeared. The mansion, her pride, her throne had been financed partly in his name. The bank had already issued foreclosure warnings. They were, in my mother's careful words, on the brink of losing everything. "And now," she added softly, "we have nowhere else to go." I looked at her, at the woman who once told me I was selfish for not joining them here, and felt an eerie calm spread through my chest. "You still have me," I said evenly. "What is it you need?" Lydia's voice cracked. "We heard you bought property nearby. The glass house, the studio. Could we stay there? Just for a while? Until we figure things out?" Her tone was small, almost childlike. My mother clasped her hands. "We wouldn't ask if we had any other choice. You've done so well, Clara. We're proud of you. We just need a little time." I looked between them, my family, the people who had built a life around erasing me, and for a heartbeat, the old ache stirred. But then something inside me shifted. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, a recognition of power reclaimed. "I can help," I said slowly, "but not the way you expect." Lydia looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "You mean?" I raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "You can't stay in my studio. That space was built for peace, not penance." My father frowned. "Then what are you offering?" I took a breath, steady and deliberate. "There's a property at the north end of the lake, one of the Solace villas I designed. It's small, but it's furnished and warm. You can stay there for 3 months, rent-free." They exchanged uncertain glances. "That's generous," my mother said cautiously. "But why not here? Why not in your home?" I met her gaze without flinching. "Because that's not my role anymore." The words came out softer than I expected, but they carried the weight of years. "You made your choice a long time ago," I continued, "and I made mine. You wanted a daughter who would build her world around yours. I became the daughter who built her own." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "Clara, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't mean for things to turn out like this." I believed her, but apologies, even honest ones, can't rebuild trust that was never nurtured. I stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the lake. Outside, the water shimmered beneath the weak sun, framed by frost. My reflection appeared beside theirs in the glass, 3 figures bound by blood, but separated by everything else. "You know," I said quietly, "this house was never meant to hold happiness. It was built for pride. Every corner, every wall, every perfect line, it was a monument to being seen. But homes aren't about being seen. They're about being safe." No one spoke. Finally, I turned back to them. "You can stay at the villa. I'll have someone bring the keys. But when spring comes, you'll need to find your own place." Lydia nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. My father looked away, his jaw tightening with a pride he could no longer afford. My mother whispered, "Thank you, Clara." But I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me, the girl who once begged for warmth from the very people now asking me for shelter. When I stepped back outside, the air was sharp and clean. I paused at the edge of the driveway, looking back at the mansion. Through the frosted windows, I could see their silhouettes moving slowly, as if the walls themselves had grown heavy. Then I looked across the lake where, in the distance, my glass-walled studio caught the last of the afternoon light. It glowed softly against the horizon, steady, unbreakable. That was my home, my truth, my peace. I walked toward my car, boots crunching against the gravel. Before I got in, I took one last look at the house that had once been the symbol of everything I'd lost. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication. Just the quiet certainty that I had survived the fire they never saw coming. 2 weeks later, Maya called to tell me the villa's tenants had moved in, my parents and sister. She hesitated before adding, Do you want me to send them a lease extension form? I smiled faintly, watching snow fall outside my window. No, I said. Let's leave it as it is. 3 months is enough. When spring came, the villa stood empty again. They had moved away, no forwarding address, no message left behind. Just silence, finally balanced. Sometimes I drove past that place in the early morning. The curtains would flutter gently in the wind, the lake light flickering on the glass. It looked peaceful. It looked healed. And maybe, in some way, so were we. Spring came slowly that year, as if the world itself had forgotten how to thaw. Each morning, the lake melted a little more ribbons of dark water threading through the ice, the sound of cracking echoing faintly like a distant heartbeat. The air softened, the light turned gold again, and with it came a calm I had never known before. I spent those mornings at my glass studio, barefoot on the wooden floor, a cup of coffee in hand. The smell of cedar and lake water filled the air. I'd open the tall windows and let the wind move through, scattering papers and sketches. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Across the water, Lydia's mansion still stood, though I'd heard through a neighbor that it had been listed for sale. No one lived there now. Its walls, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now echoed with nothing but the memory of what pride costs. Sometimes I wondered where my parents and sister had gone, but I never called, I never wrote. The chapter had closed, gently and completely, like a door sealing in the softest way. One afternoon, while reviewing design plans for a new retreat in Vermont, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Just my name, Clara Evans, written in the same looping cursive as before. Inside was an old family photograph. The four of us stood by a lake, me at 10 years old, Lydia 13, our parents behind us. My arm was half raised, as if I'd been reaching for something, but the photo had frozen the motion midair. My smile was wide, unguarded, the kind of smile that believed family was forever. On the back of the photo, my mother had written, "We should have seen you all along." That was it. No address, no signature, just that line. For a moment I sat completely still, not crying, not angry, just still. Then I placed the photo on the windowsill, where the light could touch it each morning. It didn't belong in a drawer. It belonged in the open proof that I had survived what love shouldn't require you to earn. That evening, I drove to the northern ridge of the lake, where the Solace villas stood silent in their perfection. Unit 9, the one my family had stayed in, was empty again. The curtains fluttered in the soft breeze. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of pine and lavender, my firm's signature scent for all our builds. Everything was as I'd left it, clean, spare, serene. But on the kitchen counter, tucked beneath a folded linen cloth, was something new. A small silver key. Attached to it was a note written in Lydia's handwriting. "Thank you for giving us a roof when we had none. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel small. I finally understand what you were trying to build, not walls, but peace." I traced the letters with my thumb, the ink slightly smudged. Forgiveness didn't come in a burst. It came like spring, slow, hesitant, fragile, but it came. I stood there for a long while, the lake wind moving through the open door, light glimmering across the floors I had once designed in anger but that now held only quiet mercy. Then I left the note on the counter, took one last look around, and locked the door behind me. The click of that lock sounded like closure. Weeks later, the Stillness series expanded to 5 more locations across the country. Investors praised its soulful modernism, and journalists called me the architect who built peace out of pain. But titles and awards didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the life I built when no one was watching, mornings by the lake, evenings sketching by candlelight, laughter shared with my small circle of friends who had become my true family. Home had finally found me, not through blood, but through belonging. Sometimes, at twilight, I'd sit on the dock with Maya, watching the sunset dissolve into the lake. The sky would shift from amber to rose to violet, and the reflection would shimmer like a second world beneath our feet. She'd always be the one to break the silence first. "Do you ever think about them?" I'd smile faintly. "Sometimes, but not with pain anymore. More like gratitude. They showed me what kind of love I never want again." Maya nodded softly. "You turned it into something beautiful." I watched the horizon blur into evening and said, maybe beauty was always meant to come from what tried to break us. That night, back in the studio, I wrote a line in my journal, something I'd been trying to find the words for all year. Some families build homes out of walls, others build them out of forgiveness. I learned to build mine from light. Outside, the rain began to fall slow, rhythmic, steady against the glass. The reflection of the lake merged with the reflection of the sky, until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And in that moment, I finally understood the truth that had taken me a lifetime to reach. Family isn't the people who share your name. It's the ones who let you be fully yourself inside the home you built with your own hands. As the lights dimmed and the sound of rain deepened, I walked barefoot across the room, my fingertips trailing against the cool glass. The city shimmered faintly in the distance, and somewhere in that glow I imagined them not with resentment, but with release. I whispered to the window, to the reflection, to the little girl I once was. You made it. You finally made it home. And as I turned off the lights, the last thing I saw was the silver of the lake and the pale reflection of dawn beginning to bloom quiet, endless, forgiving. Thank you for listening to today's story. If something in this journey touched your heart, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing more stories that truly speak to the soul. See you in the next video.